Welcome to our guide to virtual practicals for academic purposes. What you will see here is a recap of the work our team has performed during the entire RALDE project. In this project, we attempted to rethink the way that we do practicals in the lab and see if we could design our own versions with an online twist. In this first video, we will dive into our decision process and how to go from a standard cell culture and dissection practical and develop them into an online quiz. We'll go over how to keep learning objectives intact while also just making sure that the right decisions are made when it comes to transforming the content for online use. So let's hear what Sabine and Ariane from our team have to say about the online tools we made.
Within this RALDE project, one work package 3, focused on designing online practicals or online practical tools. And I was involved in one of them, which was focusing on making a tool to teach students cell culture in an online platform. The reason we chose this cell culture as a topic is because if I see here at the university, this is usually one of the practical skills which is, well, not necessarily more difficult to teach, but since it's a sterile environment, since there's a lot of other aspects that come into play and are important for students to know about and to get skills with, that we can train them in an online environment. They can already explore the lab, they can already get to know the rules, the safety rules, how to prevent infections and so forth before they actually go into the lab and start their own experiments. So that's why we decided to start designing an online tool there.
In my case, I also participated in work package 3, but in this case with a rodent dissection practical. And the main objective, of course, was to have a tool to teach our students and to know how a rodent dissection is carried out. But also a big important thing here is to reduce the number of animals that are used for this purpose. I mean, by doing this online practical, we know that we're going to reduce the number of animals we need for teaching purposes for the students that really need to have these skills in the future. I'm talking for future PhD students. Of course, at undergrad levels, they do not use animals, but we can show them how to do the dissection because they don't use, but we're not teaching them how to do it. And the second part is for the ones that are going to need this skill, they can be trained before with this online practical and then avoid the number of animals used for this. So that's also an important thing to highlight regarding this practical.
In order to make sure that the same learning goals could be covered also in an online practical environment compared to a live session, we went over the ones that we have when we would do it on site, but then see how can we still keep them. And there's, of course, at least in our university, we work with different types of intended learning goals. There's ones that are focused more on the knowledge. So acquiring the knowledge, we could easily cover with like a questionnaire type, like a quiz type way of structuring this online tool. On the other hand, you also want them to acquire some critical thinking skills and like how to handle certain situations or how to design the steps of a protocol and like what am I going to do today and in which order do I do it. And then we had to think about different types of questions or a 360 degrees film we made for them to explore the lab. So these are the things you have to think about, like, okay, which learning goals do I have and how do I translate that to an online platform? And also then the next step is to look at, okay, what kind of tools, types of questions, types of video material do we need to actually design these questions?
So I think the first thing is the learning goals are exactly the same that in the real lab situation, of course, because this is what we want to teach our students. But in this case, what we decided to do is to cover these learning goals, but go step by step, dividing really all the procedure in very specific steps that are easy to follow. And I have to say that by doing it, we're also able to include one extra learning goal that normally in the real situation you are not able to show. For example, when you are doing or when you plan to do a rodent dissection, you have to explain the euthanasia method for the rodents. But normally you only use one, the one that you have in the lab for the purpose you are doing. But in this case, as is a virtual situation, you can ask different scenarios of different experimental designs where you might need different euthanasia methods. So this is something that was not covered in our practical training, but now it can be covered. Of course, it was theoretically covered in the subject, but this practical is only focused in one procedure, specific procedure. So sometimes by doing it, you can just include one extra learning goal or just remove one and replace it in other activities of your subject. So it's always nice to do it because you have to rethink about your subject.
No, I agree. And indeed, we also added some learning goals, which is like the autonomous learning. So, of course, when we teach them in front of a lecture or when we demonstrate them in the lab, it's usually like listening and one-on-one. But now they have a way to go back and forth inside these tools. They can indeed look at different modules, different types of cell cultures. Well, indeed, like Ariane says, normally you just pick one to show them then at that moment. So it has some advantages also, the online tools. Yeah. Well, yeah, for the cell culture, like I say, the first thing the student need to do is not like dive into the protocol, but like get to know the lab, get to know the equipment. And one of the challenging things was there to actually capture that in one, picture or one environment. So luckily we have here a smaller cell culture, I would say, which made it easier to make this 360 degrees picture or video. While if you have a bigger lab where everything is spaced out more, that would have made it a bit more complicated. So I think in a sense we were a bit lucky that we had that lab where, for instance, the incubator, the flow cabinet, like things were close to one another. And then when making the tool, it was a lot easier to design it in a way the student can explore it. Also making pictures from the microscope, that can be challenging to have the different types, for instance, of confluency. So we played around with different types of confluency. Are they 20% confluent, 80% confluent? And capturing the different types of cells, because as you know, attaching cells is maybe easier to capture because they're attached, while the cells in suspension, they're floating. And if you just take a picture, that's not always obvious, because normally you just shake the flask and you see them moving around because they're in suspension. But yeah, so you have to think about how do I capture certain things to make the message clear to the students.
In our case, the challenge also was pretty similar. It's just how to take a picture of all the dissection room, which is not easy. So in our case, we also picked a smaller dissection room, and we also had to move some of the equipment for the picture. Because otherwise it was impossible to get it in this picture. So you don't have this 360 option. And it was a little bit more tricky in our case, but I think that we were able to pick all the materials and all the dissection room for the students. This is one thing. And the other thing also is, in our case, what we previously had, it was a video of the dissection. So our first thought for this practical is to use videos because it's more realistic. You can see all the things going on during a dissection, but then it's also very difficult to locate the organs and to show the organs once there's some hands doing all these manipulations or the body of the person who is doing the dissection. So finally we had to switch to pictures or static images. And we were a little bit afraid about that, but then we realized that they came very, very good, and we can really zoom in into the images, and it's even better than the video because you can zoom and locate much better the organs. So what we thought it was going to be a problem, now it's an advantage. So that was something that we discovered just by taking the pictures.
To allow the students to think in a similar critical way or to acquire similar skills, we try to design the questions in such a way that as if you were in the lab. For instance, one of the questions, we asked them, okay, where do you place all your materials inside the flow cabinet? And then we took a picture from inside the flow cabinet. And then is it like in the back, in the front, on the side? Because then they need to think about, indeed, okay, why can it not be in the front? And so there's feedback also why it's not correct. And then, yeah, you give them the different options that they can say, okay, there it should be. So, because this is something you normally demonstrate, you sit, you say, okay, you should ideally work in the center, a bit towards the back, because that's the best for the sterility. But then you have to think about how do I capture that. So yeah, we did that with a picture, and then they had to, well, there were different pictures, we had different scenarios, so the correct one and the incorrect ones, like we talked about before, to actually make them realize, like and that's also a bit of handling, like how do I behave within this flow cabinet.
In the case of the dissection, it's a little bit different because I have to confess that we are not going to replicate the handling, and that's impossible. I mean, the handling of an animal or the sacrifice of an animal or the real dissection, there's many other factors. There's movement when the animal is alive. There's also your feeling by doing it. There's also, when you are doing the dissection, there's pressures that you have to do with the scalpels, or how to use the forceps in an organ that it's plenty of blood or not. There's things that we cannot replicate online, that's for sure. So here what we are doing is to show the entire process and the theory and the rationale of the workflow and all the process that you need to do. But then the message is that if you want to do that, you have to train and to get the skill. But that was something that I was saying, wow, that's a pity. But indeed, when we are doing the real practical with our students, we are not giving them the skill. We're just giving the first experience, because then if they want to do it in reality, they will have to train many times. And we are not training them many times because we do not have time during the course. So what I tell them, or what if I have to think about a comparison, is we are giving them the driving license. I mean, when you get the driving license, you know how to start the car, you know how to move the car, you know the rules to circulate, but you're not a driver. I mean, the real driver knows how to drive in a sunny day, but also in a rainy day, or in a snowy day, and that gives you the experience. And so there are some skills that once you want to have them, you really have to train by repetition in the real circumstances. So that is an important thing, that we are not covering it with a online practical, but we don't have to get confused. We are not getting either in the real lab practical with our students, because they're not training by repetition. We're just giving them the first experience. It's true that we're not giving them the first experience of doing the dissection, but many of them won't do it in their professional life, so they don't need to be in contact with this animal. And we just leave a very small amount of students that they will need it in the future, some PhD students that might need that, and we block these kind of real life dissections only for the ones that really need to use animals in the future. But this is something that we have to bear in mind as well.